it's time once again for Let's Talk Legal, compliments of Neumann van Rooyen attorneys. And of course, this week we have none other than Gerda Janse van Rensburg. Gerda, again, thank you so much for joining me in studio.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks for having us.
So, Gerda, I must say today we're going to be chatting about something that I think it's a very uncomfortable situation for many people to handle, especially for both parties involved, and that is trouble with the neighbors. So we have received the following question from one of our radio friends, and it goes as follows. I'm bothered by a giant tree from my neighbors. It only grows on their side of the wall, and that separates our plots. If the tree has fruit, it falls on my porch and it stains it very badly, not to mention, of course, the smell. And in the fall, the tree sheds its leaves, which is obviously a nuisance, and I'm strongly considering cutting off the branches on my side, but the neighbor says I may not, and he's going to take me to court if I do. So what should I do? This sounds very complicated.
It's always interesting. It's you guys have an English saying that says great fences make for great neighbors. Good fences make for good neighbors. It's a wonderful saying, and it works in this instance. So we would all like to have perfect neighbors. Unfortunately, that's not quite the way it works. That neighbor that parties a bit too late at night, or has that teenage son whose radio can only go full volume and nothing less, or the people that look after your house next door. They're wonderful things, but it doesn't always work out that way. So unfortunately, life is not always harmonious when it comes to neighbors, but there is a solution. In South Africa, we have the law of neighbors, and that's the law that says, listen, this is how you're supposed to work with your neighbor, and what should be done, and what can be done, and what can't be done. And it has all our rights and obligations in it. So it's even protected in the Constitution, so it becomes interesting. It's not a very easy topic to touch on, but it's interesting.
All right. So what does the law actually say about this?
The law says that if someone owns the property, it is the owner of everything on it and under it, as well as everything that falls on it. So if you are an owner, you deserve to enjoy the use of your property as it is fair and reasonable. That is why it is unfair if your neighbor's branches is hanging over your yard and throws out the leaves onto your pool and everything gets stuck. So unfortunately, still you can't take matters into your own hands and just do what you want. And that's where it becomes a little bit tricky. We all would just climb over the wall and cut off the tree. You can't do that. It's a bit drastic, but there is other solutions.
All right. So how should someone handle this situation?
I think, first of all, it's important to try and have an open relationship with your neighbor. Go to the guy, tell him, listen, this is what's going on. Can you please assist? We also had a tree that did exactly the same. So we have an arrangement with the guy next door. Once a week, we go over the wall and we clean it up because it's our tree, and everything works out fine. But it's important that you talk to each other. Please don't do the climbing over wall thing if you haven't arranged anything. That is a different type of crime, but okay. And then if that doesn't work, write him a letter. Keep your proof. And then the next step is that you may remove the branches that overlaps your wall. So please don't climb in with a hacksaw and cut off the entire tree, but you are allowed to remove the branches that is overhanging on your side of the fence.
And when does the court actually come into the scenario?
When court comes into the scenario with neighbors, it's never a pretty picture. So if a reasonable time has lapsed and you simply can't get the branches off and your neighbor is refusing to do anything, and it is a nuisance more than the reasonable person should be willing to accept, you can go to court and ask for an interdict. The court will then tell your neighbor, listen, you have to remove this, you have to clean up, you have to see to it that the pool is not clogged. But it's expensive as any other legal thing that usually is done in courts. So it's something that we'd like to prevent. The easier path is talking to each other and trying to resolve the issue outside of court.
All right. And what about the costs involved?
The court may, if we go to court, order your neighbor to pay all your costs and the damages and all of that. So let your neighbor know about your frustration. And if he's still not paying any attention to it, then you can go to the next step. But it is expensive. It is expensive to get an interdict. But if talking no longer helps and little love letters in his postbox doesn't help, then unfortunately you don't have another choice.
So, Gerda, in conclusion, do you have any advice for our radio friends?
Don't laugh about it, Jess, but the basic rule is always do unto others. So if you don't want your neighbor cutting off your trees, then maybe just don't do his, but see to it that your earth is clean and neat, and that you are not being a nuisance to your neighbors. And be a good neighbor. It's not that difficult.
Absolutely. Gerda, thank you so much for chatting about this situation. I think many of us somewhere in our lifetimes have to deal with neighbors that can be a little bit difficult. So thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for inviting us.
So there you have it. That was, of course, Gerda Janse van Rensburg chatting a bit more about trouble with your neighbors. Remember to visit www.nvrlaw.co.za for more information.